For 600 years, the Maya built the most advanced civilization in the ancient Americas. Cities of stone rose out of the jungle. Kings were carved into towering pyramids. Scribes tracked the stars with a precision Europe wouldn't match for another 800 years. Then, in the space of about 100 years, almost all of it went silent. The monuments stopped. The kings stopped being named. The last carved dates simply end. Tens of thousands of people vanished from cities that had thrived for centuries. The jungle grew back over palaces built to last forever. And for the next 1,000 years, nobody outside the region even remembered these cities had existed, until explorers stumbled onto pyramids swallowed whole by the forest and had no idea what they'd found. This is the story of the Maya collapse. And even now, with satellites, sediment cores, and DNA, nobody agrees on exactly why it happened. By the year 700 AD, the Maya world was not a myth. It was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Tikal, in modern-day Guatemala, held as many as 50,000 people, a city larger than London at the time. Calakmul, its great rival, commanded a network of allied kingdoms that stretched across the lowlands. Between them, war and diplomacy played out for centuries, shaping the fate of dozens of smaller city-states caught in between. The Maya didn't just build, they calculated. Their astronomers tracked the movement of Venus with an accuracy that still checks out against modern instruments. Their mathematicians used the concept of 0 centuries before it reached Europe. Their scribes carved detailed histories into stone. Births, wars, marriages, the exact date a king took the throne. None of it was primitive. None of it was small. And none of it looked, in the year 750, like it was about to disappear. But underneath the temples and the trade routes, the pressure was already building. Cities had grown far beyond what the land could comfortably support. Farmers had cleared enormous stretches of rainforest to feed swelling populations. The system worked, as long as the rain kept coming on schedule, year after year. It didn't. Historians call it the classic Maya collapse, but that name is almost too clean for what actually happened. It wasn't one event. It rolled through the region in waves over roughly 200 years, hitting different cities at different times. Archaeologists studying the dates carved into Maya monuments found something eerie. 3 distinct waves of abandonment centered around the years 810, 860, and 910 AD. City after city simply stopped carving, stopped building, stopped naming kings. At some sites, the last inscription is a date and nothing else, as if the scribe meant to come back and finish the story, and never did. At Copan, the final ruler took the throne, and no successor was ever recorded. At Quirigua, a king known to history as Jade Sky ruled sometime around 895 to 900 AD, and after him, the kingship simply ends. Within a few generations, populations that had numbered in the tens of thousands dropped to a fraction of that. Palaces that once housed royal courts stood empty, and the jungle, patient as always, began reclaiming everything. For decades, historians debated dozens of causes. Then scientists started pulling data out of the ground itself, and one explanation rose above the rest. Researchers have drilled into lake beds, cave formations, and ocean sediment across the Maya region, reading each layer like the rings of a tree. What they found was staggering. The 9th century saw some of the most severe, prolonged droughts in over 2,000 years. Not one dry year. Multi-decade droughts, with rainfall dropping by as much as 40 to 70% during the worst stretches. and the timing lines up almost perfectly. The driest periods on record, clustered right around 810, 860, and 910 AD, match the three waves of abandonment almost exactly. For a civilization with no major rivers, entirely dependent on seasonal rain, and engineered reservoirs to grow maize for enormous populations, a drought on this scale wasn't an inconvenience, it was existential. Made worse, some researchers argue, by the very success of the Maya themselves. Centuries of clearing rainforest for farmland had already reduced the region's ability to generate its own rainfall, tightening a noose the Maya had helped build with their own hands. Drought remains the single most supported explanation for the collapse, but it isn't the only piece of the puzzle, and in recent years, new evidence has made the story far stranger than it stopped raining. Drought doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain what happened at Conquén. Conquén was a trade city, not a war city. It had no defensive walls, built on the belief that commerce, not conflict, would keep it safe. Around 800 AD, that belief collapsed. Archaeologists excavating the site found mass graves, the royal family and members of the nobility, murdered and dumped together, their jade jewelry and symbols of power still on their bodies. In the largest pit alone, excavators uncovered the remains of 38 people, many showing signs of violent trauma. Conquén wasn't an isolated tragedy. Across the Maya lowlands, warfare had been escalating for a century before the collapse, driven in large part by the long, grinding rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul. Every alliance one city made, the other tried to break. Every war left farmland burned and trade routes severed, stripping away exactly the resources a society would need to survive when the rains failed. Add to that the sheer size of the population. By 800 AD, the Maya lowlands were more densely settled than at almost any point before or since, possibly more crowded than the region's environment could sustain even in a good year. When the droughts hit an already strained, already fracturing political system, the result wasn't a single collapse. It was dozens of collapses, each one slightly different, all happening at once. Here's where the story stops being simple. In 2025, researchers modeling population growth across classic Maya cities found something nobody expected. In several regions, people didn't abandon their cities during the worst of the drought. They left afterward, once conditions had already started to improve. That finding cuts against the tidy version of the story, where drought forces a desperate population to flee. Instead, it suggests something more complicated, that Maya cities had only made sense as a survival strategy during hard times. Dense, costly, but offering security, trade, and shared resources. Once the climate eased and the countryside became livable again, people simply chose to leave the crowded, expensive city behind for a freer life on the land. And there's one more twist. Archaeologists studying the reservoirs that supplied drinking water to Maya cities like Tikal have found them contaminated with toxic levels of mercury, likely leached from the bright red cinnabar pigment the Maya used to paint their temples, tombs, and elite. For centuries, the very water that kept Tikal's elite alive during droughts may have been slowly poisoning them. There's also this. At several abandoned palaces, archaeologists have found what they call termination rituals. Thrones deliberately smashed, doorways ceremonially sealed, offerings buried in the floor. This wasn't panic. Someone, in a controlled and intentional way, closed these buildings down for good. Whether that was grief, religious ritual, or one final act of control over a collapsing world, nobody can say for certain. Nobody claims mercury alone brought down an empire. But it's one more thread in a story that keeps refusing to simplify. Drought, war, overpopulation, deforestation, and possibly their own engineering, tangled together until no single cause can explain what happened to every city, in every region, at every point across 200 years. By 1000 AD, the great cities of the southern Maya lowlands stood mostly empty. Vines climbed the temples. Roots split the plazas. For the people who remained in the region, the ruins became just part of the landscape. Sacred, but silent. For the rest of the world, they simply vanished from memory. It would take almost 1,000 years before outsiders rediscovered them, hacking through jungle to find pyramids nobody remembered building. And the south wasn't the whole story. As Tikal and Calakmul emptied out, cities far to the north, in the Yucatan, were only getting started. Chichen Itza rose to power in the very decades the southern lowlands fell silent. Proof that this wasn't the end of the Maya world, just a violent shift in where its center of gravity sat. The Maya themselves never disappeared. Millions of their descendants live across the region today. What collapsed wasn't a people. It was a system. Cities, kings, monuments, and a way of life that had outgrown what the land could support at the exact moment the climate stopped cooperating. Maybe that's the most unsettling part of this story. Not that a mysterious force wiped out an ancient civilization, but that a series of ordinary pressures, stacked one on top of another, was enough to end one of the most advanced societies on Earth. What do you think finally broke the Maya world? The drought, the wars, or something we still haven't found? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more unsolved mysteries from history.